Now let's assign some materials onto our explosion and let's render our explosion inside of Solaris. And here as you can see at the file cache, right now I am not loading my caches from my hard drive, and that is because I haven't written out my caches. And if I were to enable this load from disk, and here as you can see no caches has been there, and that is because I'm using this cache that is actually stored in my system RAM, and I think I have stored the first 24 frames, and because it's a pretty low res simulation of our explosion and I have plenty of gigs in my system, I think we are fine for creating this lecture. So I'm down here, I'm going to just create a null for the reference, because later we are going to import this into our Solaris. So at the end I'm going to call this one out, and let's hit space and type this render, and that for out for render, ready for render. Now in here let's create a LOP network in here, and onto the LOPNet let's dive inside, and in here we need to create a SOP import node, and let's add this, and onto the SOP path I'm going to just select my this out render node and hit accept, and now this explosion has been imported into Solaris. Let me activate my view tool to adjust my camera angle, and down here we need to create a Karma node for Karma render settings. Let's connect this, and we might also need to add some lights, and we will take a look at creating the lights later. But now let's talk about how we are going to apply the material. And right now here as you can see material has been assigned. Let's go back onto my geometry and onto the pyro solver. As you know, if we go into the look tab, here we have the material, and down here we have this assign material option enable, which means we are assigning the material. But this material, it's actually not good looking, and here is can see our explosion looks ugly. But what we are going to do, we are going to use the pyro bake volume. So let's add a pyro bake volume node. Let's add this, and what this node will do, let me arrange this in here. What this node will do, it will also assign a material. Here as you can see assign material has been enabled, and in here we have the material network location, matnet, and pyro shader. It means that inside of the pyro bake volume, and here as you can see we have this lock icon, which means that it is a digital asset, which means we can dive inside the node to take a look. And here as you can see we have inside of that we have this matnet. We are in the matnet, and inside of the matnet we have the pyro shader, and we have all of these parameters exposed at this level, at this pyro bake volume. So inside of that we have material network, and we are creating pyro shader, and this pyro shader will create a good looking explosion material. And right now we are creating the smoke, and here I can adjust the density of my smoke. I can play around with my color, and that is the color that I can set the color that I like of my smoke. And let's go into the scatter tab, and let's enable the scatter, and this scatter option will going to create this good looking or this explosion material. And what this scatter is actually doing, if you were to enable its help menu, and here we have the help for this pyro bake volume, and I encourage you to read this help because it's written in, it has been detailed, all of the information has been very detailedly written in this help. And here we can scroll down, and here we have the scatter, and here you can see we have the scatter. And what this scatter is actually doing, it's using the temperature field to create this glow on the inside. So which means that we are creating this light scattering effect. And here we have the mask, and here you can see enable mask option, and we are using the density field to mask out our this fire to create this crusty explosive looking look. Let me close this and let's go into the scatter, and here we have the masking option enable. And if I were to disable the masking, and here you can see we are getting this color from this intensity, and what that is, it's actually the temperature field, which means that wherever we have the hot spot, wherever we have the temperature, we are using this ramp to set our color. I can play around with this ramp. I can change this to red color, and here you can see basically we are using the temperature and using the ramp for assigning the color to create this light scattering effect. And then we are going to use our density field. If I were to disable the scatter, and here you can see we have the smoke, this density field, and we are going to use the density to mask out our this temperature or this glow. And if I enable the masking, and here you can see we are masking out of our density to hide, to remove some of this glow to create this look. And I'm going to let, if I were to enable the masking, here we have the option for the masking related option. I can play around with the mask width to create a higher width of our this mask. And now here you can see I can see more of my smoke and less of my inside glow. I'm going to just default out this scatter ramp, so press and hold the control and middle mouse button to default out. And here you can see I'm seeing more of my smoke and less of this glow. I'm going to default out this mask width. The default values are fine, and in here we are blurring out our mask. If I were to disable the blur, and here you can see we have this very harsh cutoff from our this smoke. And let's also enable the blur to add the blurring effect, and the default value of blurring is also fine. And in here in the intensity scale I can adjust the intensity, and if I were to lower this value down, and here you will see that we are creating less of the intense of this its inner hardcore. And I can play around with this intensity scale to create more of this glow. And at the pyro bake volume we are actually baking our this scattering volume, which means that this scattering is not going to be calculated at render time. We are baking this scattering. That is why it's named to pyro bake volume, and it is good for creating the explosion material. And now, which means I need to just connect this in here, and because we are referencing this out null, or this new changes is going to be also imported into the LOPNet. Let's dive inside and in here, and here as you can see our viewport has been refreshed, and now it's matching with our this SOP level viewport. Let's dive inside the LOPNet, and in here as you can see, because we are using the pyro bake volume and we have this material net, this matte net inside of our pyro bake volume, this matte net, this material net, and this pyro shader is not going to be imported inside of Solaris. And if I were to render this, let me go into the Karma render setting, and here you can see right now I'm using the CPU engine. Let's keep this at CPU engine, and in here I'm going to let's change this to Karma CPU, and here you can see our rendering is not look the same, and that is because we need to import our this material into the Solaris as well. Right now we are importing our volume, our explosion, but we're not importing materials. And you know, to import the materials we need to create a material library node. So let's add a material library, because materials must be going to be imported separately with this material library. So let me add this in here. And in here, we know that onto the fill tab, let me collapse its menu. And in here, we need to define the material network. And right now, this dot mean that look at the materials that are inside of this material library. If I dive inside, and right now it's looking inside. And in here, right now, nothing is here, which means if I were to click on this autofill, nothing is going to happen because no materials are present inside. What I can do, I can just change this material network. So in here, let's pick up the location, and we know that our material lives in the pyrobake volume. So let's click on this plus icon to go inside of this pyrobake volume node. Let's click on it, and in here we have the mat net or material net. Let's select this and hit accept. Now material net has been, this location has been assigned. Now all we need to do is just click on this autofill material. Let's click on it, and here as you can see, we have our this pyro shader imported inside of Solaris. And now we just need to assign this. And right now assign to geometry option has been enabled, but geometry path is empty. I can just click and drag in here to assign my this pyro shader onto this sub import, and it will work. Now if I were to change this to Karma CPU, and now here as you can see our material is working, and I can adjust my material setting from this pyro bake volume. And let me go into the LOPNet, and in here I'm going to just pin my viewport onto this Solaris context by clicking on this following selection, this pin icon. Let's click on it, and when this option is enabled, our viewport will going to be looking at this location. And here you can see we have the location. We are inside of LOPNet. And if I were to go back onto the geometry node, our viewport focus has been stick onto the LOPNet, which means I can come over here onto the pyro bake volume. I can play around with the intensity scale, and here you can see we are changing our materials. I can come over here onto the smoke. I can play around with the color of my smoke. I can change this to any color. Let's change this to blue to make my point that this material is working. I can adjust the density. Let me keep adjusting its density to create more thicker smoke. And this material, one thing to note that this pyro shader that is actually available inside of the pyrobake volume, and now we are importing in the Solaris context. This pyro material is designed to work with Karma CPU, which means, let me unpin this because right now we are in the Solaris context. We do not need to pin this. If we go into the Karma render setting, and if I were to change this to XPU, and right now we are using with the Karma CPU. If I were to change this to Karma XPU, this material will not going to work because this material is designed to work with the CPU renderer. Karma CPU and Karma XPU are not the same render engine. They are completely different render engines. And to actually make this material compatible with Karma XPU, we need to create material inside of the Solaris, which means I'm going to just remove this material library. I'm going to create a material library in here once again. Let's add this, and I'm going to dive inside. And in here, if we go right click, and here we have this Karma. Let's go into the pyro, and here we have the Karma pyro explosion material. And this explosion material will going to be work both with Karma CPU and XPU. So let's add the Karma explosion material, and here we have the material, and we need to dive inside to have access to its actual shader. And here we have the Karma pyro shader node, and in here we can adjust the density scale, and here as you can see the parameters are, these parameter looks different because it's a separate shader. And let's go into the scatter, and by default the scatter has been enabled, and which mean that we still need the pyro bake volume. Let's go in here. We still need the pyro bake volume to calculate our this scatter volume. And if I go into the file cache, sorry, into the pyro solver, it's actually the same if I were go into the file cache node, because we are still using our this pyro solver. And if I were to middle mouse button, here as you can see we have 4 VDB volumes. We have burn, density, divergence and temperature, but we do not have a scatter volume. And this pyro bake volume will going to be calculate scatter volume for us to create this scattering light effect. And let's go into the pyro bake volume, and because our this scatter has been enabled, and if I were to middle mouse button, and in here we have 5 VDB volumes. Now we can see we have a new volume called scatter. This scatter volume is what this pyro bake node is calculating. So we still need this pyro bake volume, but this pyro bake volume is actually not going to assign material, but we are actually using this to create our scatter volume. So which mean I can go into the LOPNet, and we need the pyro bake volume as well. Let's go into the LOPNet and into the material builder, and inside of our Karma Pyro shader our scatter has been enabled, which means I can just adjust these settings to create the same look. And right now it's not doing anything, because let me change this to Houdini Vulkan viewport. We need to actually assign this material. Let's go into the material library, click on this autofill to fill out our material. I'm going to enable the assign to geometry option and drag this in here. And now if I were to change this to Karma XPU, and here you can see our material is working, but right now the settings are not the same. So let's go into the material library and into the pyro explosion material, and into the Karma Pyro shader I'm going to just increase the intensity scale, and I'm going to just increase this to 250. And here you can see we have our this scattering effect back. And because we are using the XPU, and here you can see the rendering is very snappy, we are going to render our explosion very fast. And in here onto the smoke I can play around with the density to create a more thicker of my this smoke. I can play around with the smoke color, because now that is our actual material. We are creating the material inside of Solaris, and that is responsible for actually creating the material and assigning. Let's go back and in here, and if you want to create a XPU based rendering, make sure to create your material inside of this material library by using the Karma Pyro explosion material. And in the next lesson, let's take a look at the ACEs. And right now we are rendering our explosion. We have assigned our materials, but right now the colors are not accurate, and we will see how we can fix this coloring issue in the next lesson.